I have nothing left. She hammered through tears until the rancher stepped in to save her. The sun had barely risen over the quiet hills when she stepped out onto the dusty path that led from her small, worn-down house to the barn. Her hands were calloused, her clothes covered in dust and sweat from the work she had done the day before, yet she moved with a mechanical precision, as if her body had learned to keep going even when her heart felt too heavy to bear. Every morning felt the same. Every morning the world seemed colder, harder, and more unforgiving. Her eyes, once bright with hope and laughter, now carried a shadow. A shadow that had grown over the months, over the years, until it seemed to settle deep inside her bones. She had given everything she had, her energy, her time, her love, her hope. But somehow it was never enough. The ranch she had inherited from her family was barely surviving, the fences sagging, the barn roof leaking, the animals restless and hungry. Money was tight, and there was always another bill, another repair, another problem that seemed too big for one person to handle alone. She paused for a moment, gripping the wooden fence post, feeling the rough edges dig into her palms. She closed her eyes and let out a long breath, a sound that carried more despair than air. "I have nothing left," she whispered to herself, though no one was there to hear. The words felt heavy, like stones pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She knew she could not fail, not for the animals, not for the land that had been in her family for generations, but the weight of it all was suffocating. Inside the barn, she started her morning chores. She fed the chickens, swept the floor, and checked on the cows, trying to ignore the tight knot of worry twisting inside her stomach. Every task reminded her of what she had lost over the years. The help of her parents, who had passed on long ago, the support of neighbors who had moved away, the friends who had drifted apart, because life on the ranch left little room for anything else. She was alone, and yet she had to keep going. Every day she forced herself to move, to do the work, to survive. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the land. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand, smudging the dust across her forehead, and looked out at the rolling hills that surrounded her. They were beautiful in a wild, untamed way, but beauty did not pay the bills or mend the broken fences. She felt a pang of bitterness as she remembered how she had dreamed, as a young girl, of running a successful ranch, of building a life full of laughter and friends, of evenings spent around a warm fire. Now those dreams felt distant, almost unreachable, as if someone had taken them and left her with only work and worry. By midday, the sun was blazing, and she had barely eaten anything. She paused under the shade of a large oak tree, letting her hands rest on her knees, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Her vision blurred slightly from exhaustion, and she pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. But the tears came anyway, slipping down her cheeks, hot and heavy. She didn't try to stop them. She didn't even care. "I can't do this anymore," she said aloud, her voice trembling. "I have nothing left. Nothing at all." The words seemed to echo across the empty fields, swallowed only by the wind and the distant lowing of cows. For a moment, she wanted to just sit there, to let the world fade away, to disappear into the earth and never face another day of struggle. The thought scared her, but it also felt like relief. She stood slowly, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve, and forced herself to keep moving. There was still so much to do, and the animals depended on her. She could not afford to collapse, no matter how heavy her heart felt. She worked through the afternoon, her body aching with exhaustion, her mind clouded with worry and doubt. Every step, every swing of her arm, every movement of her hands felt like it was powered by sheer will, because there was nothing else left to fuel her. As evening approached, the sky turned a soft orange, painting the hills in a warm glow that felt almost cruel in its beauty. She looked out at the land again, at the barn, the fences, the fields, and the animals, and felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her. No matter how hard she worked, it seemed like the ranch demanded more than she could give. No matter how much she cared, it seemed like she was always one step behind. Her pride told her to keep going, to push through, to fight, but even pride could not fill the emptiness she felt inside. She went back inside the house, her steps slow, her shoulders slumped. The house was small, simple, and barely furnished, but it was hers. She sank into a chair by the window, resting her elbows on the table, and let her head fall into her hands. The tears came again, unbidden, slipping through her fingers, falling onto the worn wood of the table. She didn't try to stop them this time. She couldn't. Memories flooded her mind, memories of better days, of laughter and love, of a family that had once surrounded her with warmth and guidance. But those days were gone, and she was left with only herself and the unending work of survival. She felt like a shadow of the person she had once been, like the life she had imagined had been replaced with constant struggle and solitude. Hours passed, and darkness fell over the ranch. She sat by the window, watching the stars emerge one by one, their distant light a reminder of a world that seemed far removed from her own troubles. She felt small, fragile, and utterly alone. The weight of her responsibilities, her losses, and her exhaustion pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She wondered how she had come this far, how she had survived each day, each setback, each disappointment. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of determination remained. She did not know where it had come from or how long it would last, but it was there, flickering faintly against the darkness of despair. It whispered to her that she could not give up, that there were still days to live, still animals to care for, still work to be done. But the spark was weak, fragile, and the tears kept coming, threatening to snuff it out completely. She stayed by the window late into the night, staring out at the dark fields, listening to the soft sounds of the ranch at rest. The wind rustled the trees, the animals settled in their stalls, and the world moved on, indifferent to her struggles. And in that quiet, she allowed herself to feel every ounce of her exhaustion, every shard of her grief, every pang of her loneliness. She hammered through her tears, knowing she had to keep going, even though it felt impossible. By the time she finally lay down to rest, her body was exhausted, her mind heavy, and her heart raw. She closed her eyes, wishing for just a moment of peace, a reprieve from the endless demands of the ranch and the loneliness of her life. She did not know what the next day would bring, only that she would have to rise again, face the sun, and continue the struggle. And yet, even in the depth of her despair, there was a faint, stubborn glimmer of hope that she could not yet extinguish. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, beyond the hills and the fields, a pair of eyes watched from a distance. A rancher, steady and observant, noticed the shadow that had settled over her, the weight she carried alone. He did not approach yet, but he saw the struggle, and he understood that help would be needed soon. For now, she remained unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. As the first part of her story came to an end, she slept fitfully, her dreams filled with the echoes of the day's labor, the whisper of her failures, and the faint hope that somehow, someway, she would find the strength to rise again. And in the darkness, the ranch waited, patient and steady, as if knowing that help was coming to a heart that had given everything and felt it was nothing left. The next morning, the ranch felt quieter than usual. She rose with the first light, her body sore from the day before, yet her mind already crowded with the list of chores awaiting her. She moved mechanically through the morning tasks, feeding the animals, checking the fences, and filling water troughs. Every action was familiar, every movement practiced, yet there was a heaviness in her steps, a lingering ache from the exhaustion she had tried to push away the day before. As she carried a bucket of water toward the cows, she noticed a figure standing near the edge of the field, partly hidden behind a large oak tree. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that seemed calm and steady, yet sharp enough to notice the smallest details. The rancher had been observing her for days, perhaps even weeks, without her knowing. Today, he had decided to step a little closer, though still keeping a respectful distance. She froze for a moment, unsure whether to speak or look away. Pride told her she could handle this alone, that she did not need help from anyone, no matter how kind or capable he seemed. Yet, something about his quiet presence gave her a strange sense of comfort, as if he understood her struggle without a single word being spoken. "Good morning," he said gently, his voice calm and measured, not intrusive. "Looks like you've been busy already." She managed a small nod, not trusting herself to speak. Her throat felt dry, and the lump of exhaustion and worry she carried made it hard to form words. She turned back to the cows, hoping to avoid conversation, but she felt his gaze follow her, patient and unwavering. He took a few steps closer, careful not to crowd her. "If you need an extra hand, I can help," he offered quietly. "No judgment, just some work done together." Her pride flared at the offer, and she shook her head. "I've got this," she replied softly, though her voice trembled slightly. "I always manage." He nodded as if he understood and stepped back. "All right," he said, "but if you ever need help, I'll be nearby." She returned to her work, though the encounter lingered in her mind. The idea that someone noticed her struggle, that someone cared enough to offer help without demanding anything in return, was foreign. She had grown used to handling everything alone, believing that asking for help was a weakness. And yet, the thought stayed with her, quietly persistent, like a seed planted in the soil of her exhaustion. Throughout the day, the rancher continued his quiet watch. He didn't intrude, didn't make himself a presence she couldn't ignore, but he was there, steady and reliable. She caught glimpses of him at the edge of the fields, moving calmly among the land, repairing a fence post here, checking on a water trough there. His presence was subtle, but it carried a reassurance she had not realized she needed. Later, as the sun climbed high and the heat pressed down on the ranch, she found herself struggling with a stubborn gate that refused to close. No matter how hard she pushed and pulled, it remained stuck, threatening to swing open and allow the animals to wander. She tried everything, her frustration rising with every failed attempt, until finally she slammed her hand against the wood in exasperation, wincing as the pain shot up her arm. Before she could curse her luck or herself, the rancher appeared beside her, quietly assessing the problem. With a few careful movements, he adjusted the hinges and applied a steady pressure that finally allowed the gate to close properly. She stood back watching, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, almost shy. She was not used to accepting help, let alone from someone who had not demanded it or judged her for struggling. He nodded, giving a small, reassuring smile. "No problem. Sometimes the work is easier with two hands. Don't be afraid to ask." For the first time in a long while, she felt a strange warmth, a feeling that she had almost forgotten. It wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of trust, fragile and new, like the first green shoots of spring after a harsh winter. She realized that perhaps she didn't have to carry everything alone, that maybe accepting help did not make her weak. The afternoon brought more challenges, as the sun bore down mercilessly. She wrestled with tangled ropes and stubborn tools, while the rancher moved alongside her silently, offering guidance only when she struggled too much to manage alone. His presence was calm, patient, and steady. He did not rush her, nor did he scold her for mistakes. It was the first time she had felt supported rather than judged in years. As the day wore on, she began to speak in small, cautious bursts. "I didn't know how to fix this," she admitted as they worked on a stubborn fence line together. "I've been trying for days." He nodded, listening carefully. "It's not always easy to manage a ranch alone. Many people would have given up long ago. You've been handling this on your own, and that's something to respect." Her chest tightened at his words. Respect. Recognition. Not pity, not judgment, just acknowledgement of her effort. She swallowed hard, feeling her defenses slowly begin to lower, brick by brick. By evening, the work was nearly done, and the ranch began to settle into its quiet rhythm. The animals were fed, the fences secure, and the sun began to sink behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She leaned against the barn door, sweat and dirt streaked across her face, her arms aching, yet a sense of accomplishment mixed with relief. The rancher stood beside her, quiet and steady, sharing the moment without words. She realized she did not feel the crushing loneliness she had carried the day before. Instead, there was a small, comforting presence that made the weight on her shoulders feel lighter. "You did well today," he said finally, his voice calm. "You didn't have to do it all alone." She nodded, her throat tight, emotions threatening to spill over. I guess it feels different when someone helps," she admitted softly. He smiled faintly. "It can. There's nothing wrong with letting someone in. We all need help sometimes." That night, as she prepared for bed, she thought about the rancher and the quiet strength he had shown. She realized that even small gestures of kindness could make a huge difference, that having someone who understood without judgment was rare and precious. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps things could get a little easier, that she did not have to face every challenge alone. Sleep came slowly, her mind restless with the day's events, but the weight of despair that had pressed so heavily upon her yesterday had lifted slightly. There was a tiny spark now, a flicker of hope that perhaps life could change, even in the smallest ways. She clung to that spark as she drifted into a fitful sleep, unaware that this spark would grow, fueled by patience, understanding, and the unwavering support of the rancher who had stepped quietly into her life. The following days continued in a similar rhythm. She worked hard, but now there was a subtle difference in her steps. She noticed the rancher more often, not just as a presence in the distance, but as someone she could rely on for guidance, assistance, and even companionship in the simplest sense. They spoke in small exchanges, learning about each other in quiet, unobtrusive ways. He never pressed, never intruded, only offered help when she needed it most. Slowly, she began to feel a change within herself. She still carried the burdens of the ranch, but she no longer felt as crushed by them. The knowledge that someone could share the load, even in small ways, made the work bearable. And with each passing day, the connection between her and the rancher grew, not in grand gestures, but in steady, reliable acts of care that spoke louder than any words ever could. Then came a day when a larger problem arose, a sudden storm that threatened to tear through the ranch, winds lashing at the fences, rain pouring down in sheets. She worked frantically to secure the animals, her hands trembling from exhaustion and fear. The rain soaked through her clothes, her hair plastered to her face, and for a moment she felt panic rising. And then, as if sensing her struggle, the rancher appeared beside her. Together they worked against the storm, his steady hands guiding hers, his calm voice giving instructions that cut through her panic. Side by side, they managed to secure the animals and protect the property, and though the storm raged around them, they found a rhythm, a teamwork that brought them through. When the storm finally passed, they stood together, drenched but triumphant. She looked at him, eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. I couldn't have done this alone, she admitted, voice shaking. He smiled gently. You didn't have to, and you won't have to, not anymore. That night, as she lay in bed, exhausted but alive, she realized something profound. She had spent so long believing that asking for help was weakness, that relying on someone else was a failure. But now she understood that it was strength. It took courage to let someone in, to trust, to accept support when it was offered freely. And with that realization, a sense of hope began to take root, fragile, quiet, but undeniably present. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel completely alone. The rancher had stepped into her life not with grand promises, but with patience, presence, and understanding. And that, she realized, was more powerful than anything else she could have asked for. The days passed, each blending into the next, but something had begun to change. The ranch no longer felt like an endless burden. The early mornings, the long hours of work, the aching muscles, they were still there. But now they were shared in a quiet, unspoken way with the rancher. She still carried her pride, still tried to manage as much as she could on her own, but she had begun to notice the comfort of a steady presence beside her. It started with small moments. One morning, she struggled with a broken water trough, the wood swollen from recent rain. She had tried to lift it, to adjust it, but it was heavy and uncooperative. The rancher appeared quietly, bending down to help without a word, steadying the trough as she maneuvered it into place. For the first time, she didn't feel like a failure for needing help. She simply felt relief and gratitude. They worked side by side throughout the morning, their movements quiet and efficient, communicating without words as they repaired fences and tended to the animals. She began to notice things she had never seen before. The way he approached each task calmly, methodically, never rushing, always steady. His presence was calming, grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. By midday, they paused under the shade of a large oak tree, wiping sweat from their brows. The sun was hot, but the breeze was gentle, carrying the sense of fresh hay and the distant river. She sat on the edge of a hay bale, feeling exhausted but strangely at ease. "You've been working hard," he said quietly, not as an observation but as a statement of respect. "You don't have to prove anything." She shook her head, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "It's not about proving anything," she said. "It's just, I don't know how to let go. I've always had to do everything on my own." He nodded, understanding. "I know, and that's why it's okay to let someone help. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." She looked at him, really looked, and felt a pang of emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. It wasn't fear or doubt. It was something warmer, gentler. Something that reminded her that life didn't have to be endured alone. The afternoons were long, filled with work that tested both strength and patience. She struggled with stubborn gaits, tangled ropes, and a herd of restless animals. The rancher was always nearby, offering guidance, lending a hand, or simply being present. Sometimes he worked silently beside her, letting her lead, letting her feel capable. Other times, he stepped in with gentle instruction, showing her better ways to handle the work without ever belittling her effort. One day, as they worked on repairing a section of fence near the edge of the property, a sudden challenge arose. A young calf had gotten loose, darting through the tall grass and heading toward a small ravine. Panic surged in her chest, and she rushed after it, heart pounding. The rancher followed closely behind, calling the calf in calm, firm tones. Together, they managed to guide the animal back to safety. When the calf was finally secured, she sank to the ground, her legs trembling from relief and exhaustion. The rancher knelt beside her, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You handled that well," he said. "You didn't panic, you kept focus." Her chest heaved, and for the first time she allowed herself to truly exhale. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted softly. He shook his head gently. "You could have, you just didn't have to do it alone." That evening, after the animals were fed and the tools put away, she found herself lingering in the barn. She was tired, but her mind was restless, replaying the events of the day. She realized she had begun to feel something she hadn't felt in years: trust. She trusted him, not in a romantic sense, but in a deep, quiet way. She trusted his judgment, his strength, and his patience. And more importantly, she was learning to trust herself again, seeing that she could accept help without losing her independence. Over the next several days, their bond grew in subtle, meaningful ways. They shared small conversations during work breaks, talking about the weather, the animals, and memories of life before the ranch became so demanding. He shared stories of his own past, of challenges he had faced, of lessons learned. She began to open up in turn, telling him about her family, her dreams, and her fears. It wasn't always easy. She still carried walls built from years of hardship, walls that didn't fall quickly or easily. There were moments when she would snap at him for suggesting a different approach, or when she would retreat into silence, afraid to reveal too much. But each time he met her with patience and understanding, never pressing, never judging. Slowly those walls began to crumble, one small piece at a time. One afternoon, while they were fixing a roof that had been damaged in a recent storm, a ladder slipped and she nearly fell. Her heart raced and panic surged through her. The rancher caught her just in time, steadying her as she clung to the edge of the roof. She looked into his eyes, wide with fear and gratitude. I'm okay," she stammered, still shaking. He held her steady, his voice calm and firm. "You are, that's why I'm here. You don't have to do everything alone." That night she lay in bed, her muscles aching, her mind buzzing with the events of the day. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel relief, to acknowledge that she wasn't alone in her struggles. She realized that trusting someone didn't mean surrendering control. It meant accepting that life could be lighter with help, that burdens could be shared, and that strength could be found in connection. As the weeks passed, she noticed more changes within herself. Her steps were lighter, her movements less burdened, and her heart less heavy. The rancher became a constant, steady presence, not in a controlling way, but as a support she could rely on. She began to anticipate his help, not as a crutch, but as a partnership. Together, they managed the ranch more efficiently, each learning from the other, each growing stronger in ways they hadn't imagined. One day, after a long morning of hard work, they paused on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was high, casting golden light across the fields. She looked out at the land, at the animals grazing peacefully, at the fences standing tall and secure. For the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment, not just for the work done, but for the journey she had taken to get there. "You've done a lot here," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the landscape. "It's a good ranch, you should be proud." She smiled faintly, feeling warmth spread through her chest. I'm learning," she admitted. "I didn't realize how much I needed help." He nodded, a gentle smile crossing his face. "We all do. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger." The ranch continued to thrive under their combined efforts, and with each passing day, her confidence grew. She began to see herself not just as someone struggling to survive, but as someone capable, resilient, and worthy of support. The rancher's steady presence had taught her that strength was not measured by how much you could carry alone, but by the courage to accept help when it was offered and to trust in others without fear. Then came a day that tested both her and the rancher in ways they hadn't anticipated. A sudden illness struck one of the older cows, and she worked frantically to stabilize the animal, unsure if she could handle it alone. The rancher stepped in, guiding her hands, offering advice and helping her maintain calm in the midst of fear. Together they saved the cow, and in that moment she realized how far she had come. She had once felt powerless, overwhelmed, and alone. Now she felt capable, supported, and connected. That night, as she lay in bed, she reflected on the changes in her life. She had faced despair, exhaustion, and isolation, yet she had found trust, hope, and partnership in the most unexpected way. She understood now that life could be difficult, that challenges would always arise, but she no longer feared them alone. With patience, persistence, and support, she could face whatever came next. And so, as part 3 of her story came to a close, she slept with a quiet sense of peace. The trust she had built with the rancher had transformed not just her days, but her heart. She was no longer trapped in despair. She was no longer alone. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine a future where life could be shared, burdens lightened, and hope restored. The following weeks brought a new rhythm to the ranch, one that felt lighter and more hopeful than she had experienced in years. The morning sun no longer seemed oppressive, and the long hours of work were no longer crushing. With the rancher's steady presence beside her, each task became manageable, even meaningful. Together, they worked through repairs, tended to the animals, and nurtured the land in ways she had never imagined possible. She noticed the difference not only in the ranch, but in herself. She moved with purpose rather than exhaustion, her hands skilled and sure as she handled the animals, mended fences, and managed chores. The weight she had carried for so long, the loneliness, the despair, the fear, was no longer as heavy. She had begun to reclaim her strength, not only physically but emotionally. The fear of failure that had haunted her now seemed distant, replaced by determination and quiet confidence. One afternoon, she paused on a hill overlooking the fields, taking in the sight of cows grazing peacefully, chickens clucking in the yard, and the fences standing strong and straight. The sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the small river that curved through the property. She breathed deeply, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment that had long been absent from her life. The ranch was no longer a burden. It was her home, her responsibility, and her triumph. The rancher joined her quietly, standing beside her as they watched the sun dip lower in the sky. For a long moment neither spoke, the only sounds the gentle rustle of leaves and distant calls of the animals. Then he said, "You've done a lot here. The ranch is strong because of you. You should be proud." She turned to him, a soft smile spreading across her face. I am learning to be," she admitted. "For so long I thought I had to do everything alone. I didn't know how to accept help." He nodded, his expression calm and understanding. "We all need help sometimes. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger. You've shown courage in more ways than one." Her heart warmed at his words. She realized that strength wasn't about handling everything alone. It was about knowing when to ask for support, when to trust someone, and when to let others stand beside you. And in that understanding, she felt a deep sense of relief, like a heavy burden being lifted from her chest. The days continued in this new rhythm. She and the rancher worked together seamlessly, their efforts complementing one another. The fences were sturdy, the barns secure, and the animals healthy. Repairs that once seemed impossible were now accomplished with teamwork, patience, and shared effort. She began to anticipate challenges with calm determination rather than fear, knowing that she no longer had to face them alone. One morning, a storm approached suddenly, dark clouds rolling across the hills and the wind picking up. The animals became restless, and she felt a flicker of panic rise in her chest. But before fear could overwhelm her, the rancher was at her side, calm and steady, guiding her hands and offering instructions. Together they secured the animals, reinforced the fences, and worked through the rain and wind with confidence. By the time the storm passed, the ranch was intact and they both stood, soaked but triumphant, surveying their work. She looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. I couldn't have done this alone," she said softly. He smiled gently. "You didn't have to. You've learned how strong you are, but strength is better when it's shared." That evening, she sat by the fire inside the barn, the warmth of the flames a comfort against the chill that lingered after the storm. She reflected on how far she had come, from despair, exhaustion, and isolation to trust, confidence, and partnership. She had endured hardship alone, faced fear and failure, and yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. The rancher had not done the work for her. He had simply walked beside her, offering support, guidance, and patience, and that made all the difference. As the days turned into weeks, she began to notice other changes as well. Her laughter returned in small, quiet moments, the clucking of the chickens, the playful antics of a calf, the gentle breeze through the trees. She shared stories with the rancher, laughed at his quiet jokes, and found comfort in the simplicity of shared work and companionship. The walls she had built around herself for years began to crumble completely, replaced with trust, openness, and a sense of connection she had not thought possible. One afternoon, she discovered that a section of the fence had begun to sag again, and she instinctively moved to fix it herself. But before she could struggle for long, the rancher appeared, steadying the wood and handing her the tools she needed. Together, they repaired the fence quickly and efficiently. She realized in that moment that the ranch was stronger because of their partnership. The work that once felt endless and overwhelming was now a shared responsibility, and together, they made it thrive. That night she lay in bed, reflecting on the transformation of her life. She had once felt powerless, exhausted, and alone. Now she felt capable, supported, and hopeful. The despair that had consumed her for so long had lifted, replaced by confidence, trust, and resilience. She understood now that accepting help and building connections did not diminish her strength. It enhanced it. The rancher had become more than just a helper. He was a constant, reliable presence, a guide through the challenges of ranch life, and a reminder that she did not have to face the world alone. She felt a deep gratitude for him, not just for the work he had done, but for the patience, understanding, and trust he had offered freely, without expectation. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, she spoke quietly, her voice thoughtful. "I never thought life could feel like this again," she said, "like there's hope and strength even after so much hardship." He nodded, his gaze on the horizon. "Life can surprise us," he said. "It doesn't always go the way we expect. But even after the hardest times, there's always a chance to rebuild, to find strength, and to find support where we need it." She smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. I'm ready to keep going," she admitted. "I feel stronger. And I know I don't have to do it alone." From that moment on, her days carried a new energy. She worked with confidence, knowing that her efforts were supported, that her challenges were shared, and that her strength was real and growing. The ranch flourished under their combined care, each day bringing new accomplishments and small victories that reinforced her sense of capability and hope. The seasons changed, and with them, the ranch continued to thrive. She faced challenges, as all life does, but no longer with fear or despair. She met each obstacle with calm determination, guided by experience, strengthened by trust, and bolstered by partnership. The rancher remained a constant, steady presence, never intrusive, always supportive, allowing her to lead, to grow, and to reclaim her independence while also sharing the journey. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, she walked through the fields, her heart light, her spirit strong. She looked at the barns, the fences, the animals thriving under her care, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had endured hardship, faced despair, and overcome isolation. And now she stood stronger, not because she had done it all alone, but because she had learned to trust, to accept help, and to rebuild her life with patience and resilience. She turned her gaze to the rancher, who was standing quietly nearby, watching the fields. She realized that the true strength she had discovered was not only in her hands or her work, but in her heart. The ability to trust, to let someone stand beside her, and to accept support without losing herself. That was the strength that had saved her. And in that moment, she felt hope in a way she hadn't in years. Life on the ranch was no longer just survival. It was thriving, growing, and full of possibilities. She had found not just a partner in work, but a companion in life, someone who had stepped in quietly and helped her reclaim what she thought she had lost forever. The night settled over the ranch, peaceful and calm. She looked out over the fields, the animals resting, the fences secure, the barn standing strong. She felt a sense of completion, a quiet fulfillment that came not from perfection, but from resilience, trust, and shared effort. She had nothing left of despair, nothing left of isolation, only strength, hope, and a renewed life waiting to be lived. As she lay down to sleep that night, she knew she had crossed a threshold. She had faced the lowest point of her life, endured the weight of loneliness and hardship, and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for the future. The rancher's steady presence had guided her, but the courage had always been hers. And with that courage, she knew that life would continue to grow, to surprise, and to offer hope, no matter what challenges lay ahead. For the first time in a long while, she slept peacefully, her heart light, her spirit renewed, and her future filled with possibility. She was no longer alone, she was no longer lost, and she had everything she needed to face tomorrow with strength, hope, and confidence.